No one expected the prosecutor to smirk when he saw her handcuffed. But Richard Kane always smiled before he tried to destroy someone. Dr. Maya Ellison had spent her life saving others. Yet here she was chained, accused, and about to watch her career burn because a white man with power wanted it so. She sat in the cold metal chair, eyes fixed on the scuffed wooden floor of the New York criminal court, trying to quiet the pounding in her chest. The fluorescent lights above hummed, the sound mingling with the whispers of reporters hungry for another scandalous trial. She wasn't guilty. She knew it. Kane knew it. Hell, half the city probably knew it. But truth had little currency when your skin was black and the man on the other side of the courtroom carried the title Assistant District Attorney, with a gleam of self-righteousness in his eye. The charge? Negligent homicide. The real crime? Being the only doctor on call in a nightmarish ER shift where a white socialite overdosed and the patient's powerful family wanted someone to blame. Kane's opening statement had been a masterclass in performance. He painted Maya as reckless, arrogant, unfit to wear the white coat. Each word was sharpened to cut into the jury's trust in her. Every ladies and gentlemen was a sugar coating over venom. Maya's defense attorney, Gloria Marquez, fought to keep her composure, but she could feel the tide turning against them. Kane had connections. Kane had the press. Kane had the jury leaning forward, some with narrowed eyes, others with barely concealed judgment. From the back of the courtroom, a pair of polished boots stepped onto the marble floor with a quiet authority. The figure moved slowly down the aisle, every juror's gaze shifting toward him. His uniform bore the insignia of a four-star general, his chest decorated with ribbons earned in places most Americans could barely point to on a map. General Samuel Grant didn't attend trials unless something mattered, and when he stopped by Maya's defense table, placing a hand gently but firmly on her shoulder, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Maya," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of command, "I'm here for you." Kane's smirk faltered. Just a flicker, but it was enough for Gloria to catch it. The general took a seat directly behind Maya, his eyes never leaving the prosecutor. The judge adjusted her glasses, visibly unsettled. "General Grant, your presence here is unexpected." "Justice is my business, Your Honor," he replied, tone crisp but polite. Maya wanted to ask why he was here, why a man she barely knew outside of brief charity work appearances would sit in her corner now. But before she could, Kane was back on his feet, voice raised, eager to reassert control. "Your Honor, the defense seems to be staging a spectacle." "Objection," Gloria cut in. "The defense has every right to call witnesses who can speak to Dr. Ellison's character, expertise, and service. General Grant is prepared to do just that." The judge leaned back, studying Kane. "I'll allow it." Kane's jaw tightened. He didn't like losing control. The general's testimony was brief at first. He spoke of Maya's volunteer work in war zones, her tireless service to both soldiers and civilians, her unshakable ethics under pressure. But then, with the jury hanging on his every word, he pivoted. "On the night in question," Grant said, "Dr. Ellison was working under conditions no human should endure. Overcrowded ER, multiple critical patients, understaffed by more than half. I was in that hospital myself visiting a wounded soldier when I saw her save 3 lives in under 30 minutes. That is not negligence. That is heroism." Kane sprang up. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant." "It is entirely relevant," Gloria shot back, "to whether the jury believes Dr. Ellison acted recklessly or with the utmost professionalism under impossible circumstances." The judge nodded. Overruled. Grant wasn't done. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Kane. "And I have evidence that certain witnesses for the prosecution were persuaded to remember events differently." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Kane froze. His confident posture sagged, just a fraction, but enough to betray that he knew exactly what the general was referring to. Maya felt a rush of air in her lungs she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since her arrest, she believed she might walk out of this courtroom free. What she didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that the general had been keeping a file. And in that file was proof that this trial was never about justice. It was about destroying her to protect someone far more powerful. The air in the courtroom had shifted, no longer thick with Kane's confident dominance, but electric with suspicion. The jurors leaned forward, some exchanging glances, others fixing their eyes on the general as though he were a character who had stepped out of another kind of story, entirely a story where justice was actually possible. Gloria could feel it. She pressed her pen against her notepad, almost hard enough to snap it, her mind racing through the cross-examination strategy she'd been nurturing like a secret weapon. "General Grant," she said, her voice even but firm, "you mentioned evidence regarding prosecution witnesses. Could you elaborate?" Kane jumped in before the general could answer. "Your Honor." The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Sit down, Mr. Kane. I want to hear this." A muscle twitched in Kane's jaw, but he obeyed. Grant's voice dropped a register, slower now, deliberate. Several individuals testified that they saw Dr. Ellison ignore the victim, that she dismissed the patient as a lost cause. But according to statements they made that same night, statements I have here in sworn affidavits, they said the opposite. They said she fought for that woman's life. Every second. The courtroom went still. "Who altered their testimony?" Gloria asked. "I'm not at liberty to name names without further clearance," Grant said. "But I can tell you that one of those individuals is on the prosecution's payroll." The jury's reaction was visibly a stiffening of spines, the narrowing of eyes. Kane's pen clattered to the table. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. The defense is throwing unsubstantiated accusations to distract from the fact that their client's patient is dead." "No," Grant said, rising from his seat. "The patient is dead because she was poisoned. And because the truth is inconvenient for you, Mr. Kane, you've tried to bury it beneath lies." Gasps broke from the gallery. The judge's eyebrows shot upward. Gloria seized the moment. "General, are you saying Dr. Ellison's patient was intentionally poisoned?" "Yes," Grant replied, his gaze unwavering. "And I have forensic reports to prove it, reports that mysteriously disappeared from the hospital's files, but were preserved in a classified military investigation because the victim's husband was under surveillance for international arms trafficking." Kane's face drained of color. The judge looked between them, her voice cutting through the rising noise. "Mr. Kane, is the prosecution aware of these reports?" Kane didn't answer. He reached for a glass of water, his hand trembling just enough for the jury to notice. Gloria pressed harder. "Your Honor, I move to subpoena the full investigative file from the Department of Defense. This is not just relevant, it's pivotal to the defense's case." The judge gave a slow, measured nod. "Granted. Court will recess until tomorrow morning while the necessary documentation is produced. Mr. Kane, you are to cooperate fully. If I find out you've withheld evidence," she let the threat hang in the air. The gavel fell. Court adjourned. Outside, the January wind bit into Maya's skin, but for the first time since her arrest, she felt something almost like warmth in her chest. "Why?" she asked, turning to General Grant as they stepped onto the courthouse steps. "Why are you doing this for me?" Grant looked out over the crowded press lines, then back at her. "Because you saved my son's life in Afghanistan. And because I've seen too many good people crushed under the weight of lies and politics. You deserve better." Maya swallowed hard. "I didn't even know." "You weren't supposed to," Grant said. "But when I heard your name, I knew this trial wasn't about medicine or negligence. It was about power. And power's only afraid of one thing: truth with proof." The crowd surged as reporters began shouting questions, but Grant's security detail formed a barrier. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, the questions sharp and eager. "Dr. Ellison, do you believe the prosecution is engaged in a cover-up?" "General, are you accusing the district attorney's office of corruption? Is this case politically motivated?" Gloria steered Maya toward a waiting car, whispering, "Don't say a word to the press. Let Kane stew. We've just cracked open the door, now we push it wide." That night, Kane sat alone in his office, the blinds drawn, the city skyline a blur beyond the glass. His phone buzzed. "Do you have it under control?" The voice was deep, accented. "I had it under control," Kane snapped. Then Grant showed up. "You didn't tell me he had leverage." "That's your problem," the voice replied. "The doctor must be discredited. If she talks about what she knows, it will not just be you on trial." Kane's throat tightened. "She doesn't know anything concrete." "You'd better hope so." The line went dead. Kane leaned back in his chair, sweat beading at his temple. He had built his career on winning at any cost. But now the cost was shifting, and the game board was no longer his alone to control. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Journalists had been running headlines all night about the mysterious military evidence and the explosive testimony of a four-star general. The public was watching. The DA's office was watching. The judge entered, face set in stone. "We have received preliminary files from the Department of Defense," she announced. "And I will say this, what I have read so far is troubling." Kane shifted in his seat. Gloria stood, her voice calm but carrying. "Your Honor, with your permission, the defense calls its next witness, forensic toxicologist Dr. Edward Laskin." A bespectacled man in his 50s took the stand, his lab coat exchanged for a navy blazer. After being sworn in, he began to speak in precise, deliberate terms. "The toxicology reports from the victim, Rebecca Aldridge, show the presence of a rare compound thallium sulfate. This substance is not typically used in medical settings and is a known poison." The jury's eyes widened. "And what would the symptoms of such poisoning resemble?" Gloria asked. "In the early stages, confusion, difficulty breathing, muscle weakness. Later, cardiac arrest. To an untrained eye, or even in a chaotic ER, it could mimic the effects of a severe overdose." Gloria nodded. "Was Dr. Ellison's treatment protocol consistent with treating a patient suffering from thallium poisoning?" "Yes," Dr. Laskin confirmed. "She did everything possible under the circumstances. Unfortunately, the dose was lethal before she even saw the patient." Kane was on his feet in an instant. "Objection, Your Honor, this is speculative." "It's science," Dr. Laskin replied coolly. "And it's the truth." The judge overruled the objection. Gloria's voice sharpened. "Dr. Laskin, you mentioned that these results were missing from the hospital's records?" "They were. Someone with access to the system deleted them. But a duplicate was stored in the military's secure database because the victim's husband was flagged for criminal investigation." Gasps rippled again through the courtroom. Gloria turned to the jury, letting the silence linger. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. This was not medical negligence. This was murder, and the wrong person is on trial." From his seat, Kane could feel his case crumbling. Every point he had built was unraveling. But he still had one card left, a witness whose testimony could bury Maya in doubt again. When the judge allowed him to proceed, Kane stood, smoothing his tie. The prosecution calls Nurse Denise Carter. A woman in her late 20s took the stand, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She looked nervous, but Kane greeted her with the warmth of an old friend. "Ms. Carter, you were present in the ER the night of Rebecca Aldridge's death." "Yes." "And you saw Dr. Ellison's actions firsthand?" "Yes," Carter said, voice wavering. She didn't prioritize the victim." Maya's stomach dropped. "Could you elaborate?" Kane asked. "She treated other patients first. She said something about resources being better used elsewhere." Kane turned to the jury, his expression grave. "No further questions." Gloria rose slowly, her eyes fixed on the nurse. "Ms. Carter, how long have you worked at St. Luke's Hospital?" 3 years. "And have you ever been disciplined?" "Yes, once. A verbal warning." "For what?" Carter hesitated. "A medication error." Gloria's tone softened. "Ms. Carter, did anyone from the district attorney's office speak to you before your testimony?" Carter's eyes darted toward Kane, then back to Gloria. "Yes." "And did they suggest what they wanted you to say?" Kane was on his feet. "Objection. Overruled," the judge said firmly. "Answer the question." Carter's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." The jury collectively shifted in their seats, shock plain on their faces. Gloria pressed the advantage. "And were you offered anything in exchange for your testimony?" A tear slid down Carter's cheek. "A transfer to a better department and protection from a pending malpractice review." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Kane's face was unreadable, but the tension in his clenched fists spoke volumes. Gloria turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, this is not just witness tampering, it's obstruction of justice. I move to dismiss all charges against Dr. Ellison immediately." The judge's expression was grim. "I will take this under advisement. Court will reconvene after lunch." The gavel fell again, but this time, the sound felt like the crack of ice before it breaks completely. Outside in the hallway, Kane was cornered by a swarm of reporters. For the first time in his career, he didn't have a ready soundbite. His answers were clipped, his jaw set. Meanwhile, Maya sat in a quiet conference room with Gloria and General Grant. "You're winning," Grant said, "but he's desperate now. That makes him dangerous." Maya nodded. I'm not afraid of him anymore. You should be, Gloria replied. Desperate men with power are the most unpredictable kind. Grant leaned forward. I'll make sure he doesn't get another chance to twist this. But when this is over, Maya, you need to decide how far you're willing to go. Clearing your name is one thing. Exposing the whole rotten system? That's another. Maya met his gaze. If they tried to destroy me, they've probably destroyed others. If I walk out of here free, I'm not walking away. Grant smiled faintly. Good. Because I've been waiting for someone willing to fight that fight. Lunch recess was anything but restful. The courthouse cafeteria buzzed with speculation, jurors whispering in corners despite the judge's stern warnings not to discuss the case. Upstairs, the defense team's war room was alive with tension. Gloria's phone kept lighting up calls from reporters, emails from colleagues, messages from strangers claiming to have dirt on Kane. But the most important call came from a blocked number. Gloria answered with caution. Marquez. A deep voice replied. You don't know me, but I used to work in the DA's office. Kane has a file hidden in his personal safe. It contains correspondence proving he knew about the toxicology results and intentionally suppressed them. Gloria's eyes narrowed. And why are you telling me this? Because my conscience is heavier than my fear, the voice said. Check his office. Bottom drawer. Combination is 18-24-6. The line went dead. Grant, sitting across from her, caught the look in her eyes. What? We just got a gift, she said. If we can get that file before court resumes, this trial might end today. Grant didn't hesitate. Leave that to me. Kane was in the courthouse's private dining room, sipping bitter coffee and reviewing his notes, when his phone rang. You're being sloppy, the same accented voice from the night before hissed. Reporters are circling. Your witness cracked. If the file in your office surfaces, you're finished. Kane's grip tightened on the phone. No one is getting into my office. Make sure of it. Or you won't just lose your job, you'll lose everything. 30 minutes later, Grant returned to the defense's conference room, a leather folder in his hand. He set it on the table. He really should invest in a better lock. Inside were printed emails correspondence between Kane and a private investigator hired by the Aldridge family. The PI reported back days before the trial began. Toxicology indicates poisoning. Not favorable to negligence angle. Recommend suppressing. Kane's reply was short. Understood. Proceed with agreed narrative. There were also bank records transfers to a Cayman Islands account in Kane's name, timed perfectly with the witnesses' changed statements. Gloria scanned the documents, her pulse racing. This is it. This is the nail in the coffin. When court resumed, the atmosphere was different. The gallery was even more crowded, word having leaked that something big was about to drop. The judge took her seat, scanning the room with a sharp, assessing look. Your Honor, Gloria began. The defense has obtained new evidence documents from the prosecution's own office proving deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence. With the court's permission, I'd like to introduce these into the record. Kane was on his feet instantly. Objection. Those documents were stolen. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Kane, are you admitting they are genuine? Kane froze. If it's not. They are genuine. Grant's voice cut in from the gallery, carrying over the room. And if Your Honor requires, I'll testify under oath as to how I obtained them. The judge motioned for the bailiff to take the folder. She read the first page, then the second, her expression hardening by the second. Mr. Kane, step forward. Kane rose slowly, his eyes flicking to the jury, then to the doors, as though calculating escape routes. Mr. Kane, the judge said, did you knowingly withhold toxicology results that proved the victim was poisoned? Kane's voice was low. I was following orders. Whose orders? A muscle in his cheek twitched. The district attorney himself. Gasps erupted across the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. You understand the gravity of what you've just admitted? Yes, Your Honor. Then I have no choice. All charges against Dr. Maya Ellison are hereby dismissed, effective immediately. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Attorney General's office for criminal investigation into prosecutorial misconduct. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. The courtroom exploded into noise, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, people on their feet. Maya sat frozen, the words, charges dismissed, echoing in her mind. Gloria leaned close. You're free, Maya. But before relief could settle, the judge's voice rang out again. General Grant, Would you remain a moment? I believe you have further testimony that may aid the coming investigation. Grant stepped forward, removing his hat. Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom quieted as he spoke. This case is a symptom of a much larger sickness. I've seen it in war zones, I've seen it in politics, and I see it herein the way power protects itself, even at the cost of innocent lives. This isn't just about Dr. Ellison. It's about every person chewed up by a system that would rather punish the vulnerable than confront the powerful. The judge regarded him solemnly. Your words are noted, General, and they will be entered into the record. Outside, the press swarmed. Kane, pale and sweating, was hustled into a black sedan that sped away before anyone could shove a microphone into his face. Maya, flanked by Gloria and Grant, faced a wall of cameras. Dr. Ellison, a reporter shouted, "Do you feel vindicated?" Maya took a breath. "I feel awake. I came into this building a defendant. I'm leaving it a witness to what needs to change." She glanced at Grant. "And I'm not done speaking." That evening, the news ran the story nonstop. Kane's downfall, the DA's impending investigation, the revelation of the poisoning. It dominated every channel. But what caught the public's attention most was Maya's decision. Instead of disappearing into quiet relief, she announced she was launching a foundation dedicated to defending medical professionals targeted for political or racial reasons. Grant agreed to serve on the board. In a small office above a Harlem community clinic, she stood before a mismatched desk and looked at the first donation envelope, slid under the door by someone she'd never met. Inside was a note. For the next person they try to destroy, don't let them. Meanwhile, in a penthouse apartment overlooking the East River, the DA himself poured a drink, staring at the glowing skyline. His phone buzzed. It didn't work. Kane's voice said bitterly from the other end. "I noticed," the DA replied. "What now?" The DA took a slow sip of whiskey. "Now we make sure she doesn't get too powerful. People forget. We'll make sure they forget her too." But what neither of them knew was that Grant had already passed a sealed envelope to a federal prosecutor package that didn't just implicate Kane, but connected the DA to the Aldridge family's criminal dealings. This fight wasn't over. It had only changed battlefields. Maya stood on the clinic rooftop that night, the cold air carrying the hum of the city. Below, life went on: sirens, laughter, arguments, music. She thought of the ER, of the people she'd saved and lost, of how close she'd come to becoming another cautionary tale whispered about in hospital corridors. Grant joined her, his coat collar turned up against the wind. "You know they'll come after you again," he said. "I know," she replied. "But this time, I'll be ready." And somewhere in the city, a clock began ticking for the people who had once thought her an easy target. Because Maya Ellison was free and she was coming for them. 2 weeks after the trial ended, New York was still talking. Headlines didn't fade this time, they multiplied. Investigative reporters dug into the Aldridge family, unearthing shell companies, offshore accounts, and a trail of political donations that led directly to the DA's office. The city's power players were in damage control mode. But Maya Ellison wasn't waiting for the system to fix itself. She was building her own. Her new foundation, the Ellison Justice Initiative, had already taken on 3 cases of minority doctors accused under questionable circumstances. The office was small, resources stretched thin, but every morning the phones rang with new calls for help. The day the final blow landed, Maya was in the middle of reviewing intake forms when Grant walked in, carrying a manila envelope. "You're going to want to see this," he said. Inside was a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Kane had been arrested on charges of obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and accepting bribes. But that wasn't the headline. The real shock was in the second paragraph. "Based on new evidence provided by your testimony and additional investigation, the Manhattan District Attorney, Charles Whitmore, will also face indictment on federal corruption charges." Maya read it twice, her hand tightening on the paper. "It's over," she murmured. Grant shook his head. "For them? Maybe. For us? Not even close. Power doesn't die, it shifts. There will be others." That night, the networks lit up with a live broadcast. The Attorney General announcing charges against Whitmore, Kane, and several associates. They called it one of the largest corruption cases in New York judicial history. But the real moment came when a previously sealed portion of the military investigation was released to the public. It detailed exactly how Rebecca Aldridge had been poisoned by her own husband, to keep her from testifying against him in an arms trafficking case. The jury that had once eyed Maya with suspicion now saw her name cleared not just legally, but morally. Her exoneration was total. And yet, she didn't feel like celebrating. 3 days later, she returned to St. Luke's Hospital. Not to work, her medical license was still under review due to the months-long suspension, but to walk the halls, to feel the hum of the ER again. Nurses stopped her, some with tears, some with apologies they hadn't dared speak before. One resident, barely out of med school, gripped her hand. "You made me believe it's possible to fight back," he said. Maya left the hospital and found herself drawn to the small park across the street. The winter sun was setting, casting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. Grant was waiting on a bench. "Thought you might come here," he said. She sat beside him. "I should be happy. I'm free, the truth is out. But I can't stop thinking Rebecca Aldridge still died. No matter what happens to her husband, she's gone." Grant nodded slowly. "Justice doesn't bring people back. It only keeps the next loss from happening." They sat in silence for a long moment, the city noise fading into the background. In the weeks that followed, Maya's story went national. She spoke before Congress about systemic bias in prosecutions, testified at judicial reform hearings, and appeared on every major news outlet. But she refused to let her public platform turn into empty noise. At one televised interview, the host asked, "What do you say to people who think your case was an exception, that most prosecutions are fair?" Maya leaned forward, her gaze steady. "I say this, fairness is not a default. It's a fight. And the fight doesn't stop when one person walks free. It stops when no one has to stand where I stood." Her foundation grew. Donations poured in. She hired a team: attorneys, investigators, social workers. Grant became the unofficial strategist, guiding the initiative through political minefields. One case in particular hit close to home. A Haitian-American surgeon in Chicago accused of malpractice after a wealthy patient's death. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Maya flew to Chicago, sat in the front row of the courtroom, and when the defense called her as a character witness, she spoke not just of the surgeon's skill, but of the same pattern that had nearly ended her life. When that surgeon was acquitted, he hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You didn't just save my career," he said. "You saved my life." But the shadow of the DA's network lingered. The Aldridge family's patriarch had vanished, rumored to be hiding overseas. The thought that he might still be pulling strings gnawed at her. One rainy night, as she left the foundation office, she found an unmarked envelope under her car's windshield wiper. Inside was a single piece of paper, a photo of the Aldridge patriarch boarding a private jet, with a handwritten note, "He's in Morocco." Maya stared at it for a long time before calling Grant. "You're not thinking about going after him," he said. "I'm thinking about making sure he can't hurt anyone else," she replied. Grant sighed. "You've learned faster than I thought. All right, let's make a plan." 6 months later, news broke of an international arrest in Casablanca. Thomas Aldridge, taken into custody on charges ranging from arms trafficking to conspiracy to commit murder. The extradition process was slow, but inevitable. Maya didn't attend the press conference. She didn't need to. The fight had moved beyond her personal survival. She stood instead in a small clinic in the Bronx, watching as a single mother held her newborn for the first time, tears streaming down her cheeks. The doctor delivering the baby was one of the first her foundation had defended, a man who had once faced losing his license over false claims. This, Maya thought, is why. 1 year to the day after her acquittal, she stood on the steps of the courthouse again. The press was there, but this time it wasn't for a trial. It was for a rally, dozens of people who had been wrongly accused, standing together, speaking out. Maya took the microphone. The winter air burned her lungs, but her voice was clear. "I came here a year ago in handcuffs. I stand here today in freedom. But my freedom means nothing if it isn't shared. The system counted on my silence. It counted on yours. It still does. But we are here to say loudly, clearly, that we will not be silenced. Not now. Not ever." The crowd roared. She looked out over them, faces of every race, every age, every background. Some she had helped, some she had yet to meet. And she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Later that evening, as the courthouse steps emptied and the city returned to its restless rhythm, Maya stood alone in the shadow of the building. Grant joined her, hands in his pockets. "You gave them something today," he said. They gave it to themselves, she replied. I just reminded them they had it. Grant smiled faintly. You ever going to slow down? Not while there's someone out there who thinks they can do what Kane and Whitmore tried to do to me. The wind carried the distant sound of sirens, the city's heartbeat never stopping. Maya turned toward the lights, her coat billowing in the cold. Freedom wasn't a finish line. It was a weapon, and she intended to wield it until the day she couldn't. The last words she spoke that night weren't to Grant, or to the press, or to the crowd. They were to herself, quiet but certain. They picked the wrong doctor. And the city, vast and indifferent, seemed to answer back in the hum of its streets. Not anymore. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.